we could sell the house.
After 30 years, he finally sent me son a bill. They say a mother's love is unconditional. They are wrong. Mine, it turns out, had a price. And after 30 years of extending unlimited credit, I finally sent me son the bill. The registered letter arrived at his meticulously landscaped home this morning. Its contents are called itemized accounting of every bailed out business, every forgotten land, every sacrifice that was reputed as my maternal duty. The final sum was staggering, but it was nothing compared to the price he had paid in self-respect. It was now finally calling Zoo. The little red flag on the post box at the end of my drive was down. From the living room window, I watched the mail carrier's truck disappear around the bend, its familiar home fading into the quiet of a Tuesday morning. The house was still, holding its breath. My own breathing was even, my hands steady as it smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on the back of the armchair. There was no tremor, no flutter of second thoughts. There was only a profound and unsettling calm, the kind that follows a fever breaking. I had rehearsed this moment for weeks. In my mind, the phone would ring the instant the checking number registered as delivered. David's voice, a familiar storm of indignation and wounded pride, would crash against my ear. Or perhaps Sarah's, her tone a carefully crafted syrup of concern, lies the poison of pity. Eleanor, are you feeling alright? This isn't like you. We're worried. But the phone on the hall table remained silent, a black plastic relic in a pool of morning sun. The silence was louder than any shouting he had imagined. It was a tactical silence, a gathering of forces. I knew my son, he would not impulsively. He would read the document, then read it again. He and Sarah would confer in low, urgent tones, their words weaving narrative where I was the villain, the unstable matriarch, the source of the sudden, inexplicable crisis. Walking into the kitchen, fill a kettle and set it on the stove. The small, domestic rituals felt essential, and chores in it that had otherwise been cast adrift. As the water began to heat, my mind went not to David, but to the invoice itself. It lay on his desk now, I presume several pages of crisp, heavy bond paper. I had typed it myself on my old word processor. The deliberate click of the keys again a final testimony. It was not an emotional plea. It was a literal initial instruments for Vance in the engine gun inches from 518 2 from Tahoes of Chiuca 2012 built at local nursery red for salary from library part-time item 25 June 2015 demand as spent cost property. Verbal agreement for repayment schedule uninitiated. The list went on, page after page. Each entry was a ghost, a small debt, a dream I once held for myself. A promotion he didn't pursue because David's first star setup was in crisis. A chipped off Florence canceled it because Sarah's freelance business needed a new computer. Each sacrifice had been framed as a mother's joy, an investment in my family happiness. For 30 years, I had accepted that narrative. I had allowed my own life to be a resource, a well from which they could draw without consequence or question. The kettle shrieked, tearing to the quiet. I poured the boiling water over at the back in my favorite mop, the one my husband, Robert, had given me years ago. Its familiar weight in my hands comforting. This wasn't type of vengeance. Vengeance is a hot, messy thing. This was about balance. It was about correcting ledger that had been horrifically imbalanced for decades. It was about announcing, in the clearest terms he could devise, that the bank of Eleanor was officially closed. The silence from their end was just a stratagem when realizing the locks had been chained. A quiet war had begun, not with a declaration shouted from the rooftops, but with a registered letter and the deafening tick of a kitchen clock. And I, for the first time in a very long time, was ready. The tea had gone cold in my hands. I hadn't noticed. My gaze was fixed on a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a 17-year-old David, reading proudly beside his first car. It was a second-hand Ford Robin's blue Pronto styling, but to him, it was a chariot. To me, it was the first blank check I ever seen for him. It's just to get me through college, Mom had said, his eyes wide with earnest promise. I'll pay you back with my first proper paycheck, every penny. I believed him, of course. With one eye, he was Mason. That fortran was a small, manageable sum, paid for from me librarian's salary and what little my husband, Robert, had left in our main current account. The repayment never came. His first paycheck and all the ones that followed were a fraud-based student debt rent and the magnetic pull of a lifestyle just beyond his reach. The car was eventually sold for scrap, but the president had been set, a president that grew year by year, like a quiet, creeping van that I mistook for the natural rot of a family tree. The van tightened most significantly 5 years ago, with the house on a spent clause. It was Sarah who drove that conversation. I remember the Sunday look clearly. The roast chicken was resting, and the grandchildren were chasing it in the garden. Sarah sat opposite me, her hands clasped around a mug of tea, her expression a perfect blend of hope and manufactured anxiety. "We found it, Eleanor," she said, her voice soft. "The perfect place. A garden for the kids, good schools, but the deposit she trailed off, letting the unspoken word settle in the air between us." David picked it up the thread seamlessly. "We're just a bit short. It's an investment, really, for everyone. The grandkids will be so close to you." It was always framed that way, a collective benefit, a family venture in which he was the silent, non-voting partner. The Ahamilam wasn't a gift. They assured me it was a loan to be repaid once Sarah's graphic side business was properly established, and I wrote the check. I transferred the funds from the account keen about. The on-me salary had always been paid into. I felt the familiar pang of a mother's pride. Mingled with a quiet unease I chose to ignore. The unease was Robert's voice, a faint in the back of my mind. He had always been the pragmatist, the one who saw numbers not just as figures, but as stories of discipline or choice. "Be careful, Elle had on say long ago, watching a teenage David widow 20 pounds out May for a concert. Our boy has a hole in his pocket where his gratitude should be." I had dismissed it as fatally cynicism then. Now it felt like prophecy. Over the years, the regrets had changed. The tentative "can I borrow" of his youth had morphed into the confident well-need of his marriage. The transition was so gradual I barely noticed it happening. It was a slow erosion of boundaries, a subtle rewriting of family contract where my role was simply to provide and his was to receive. The failed tech startup, the essential extension on their host, the private school fees. It was a new blank cheeky, filled out with my 7 share and cast my unconditional love. Any hesitation on my part was met with gentle, wounded confusion. "Don't you want to see us succeed? Don't you want the best for your grandchildren?" It was a brilliant, unspoken strategy. They never demanded, they simply created a vacuum of need that they knew my maternal instinct would rush to fill. But what I never knew, what I never told them, was that the well they were drawing from was not my only one. Robert, the meticulous accountant, had seen David's nature far more clearly than I had allowed myself to. The inheritance he left me was partitioned. The main account, the one I used for bill and for them, was modest, but then there was the other portfolio, the one I had managed with questionnaires for decades. He called it his rainy day fund. I now thought of it as my fortress, built brick by brick with his foresight. It was a secret I had kept for 15 years, a silent testament to a husband who had sought to protect me even from our own son. That was the money they didn't know about. That was the bedrock on which was now finally standing. The breaking point didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It came on a Wednesday afternoon in late April, disguised as an act of grandmotherly love. I was terror house on Aspen Close, the very house my money had helped secure. To watch the children while Sarah had a client meeting. The afternoon had been a pleasant blur of Lego castles and picture books. After settling 7-year-old Leo and 5-year-old Maya in front of the television with a plate of sliced apples, I went to the kitchen to start on dinner, my small contribution to their busy lives. That's when I heard the car in the drive. David was home early. I smiled, thinking it was a lovely surprise. I was about to call out a greeting when I heard him and Sarah speaking in the utility room. Their voices muffled by the closet door, but clear enough in the quiet house. They must have come in through the back. I paused, my hand hovering over the vegetable peeler, not wanting to interrupt. The numbers just don't work, David, Sarah was saying. Her tone clipped with an impatience he knew well. It was her business voice. Your commission last quarter was a disaster. If we want to launch the new studio and that anniversary cruise, we need a serious capital injection. Ignore. David's voice was very placating. I'll talk to my boss, see if I can get a bigger advance. There was a short, sharp laugh from Sarah. It was not a pleasant sound. Advance isn't going to cut it. We need a permanent solution. We need to be realistic about the biggest asset we have access to. A cold stillness began to creep up my spine. I put the pillar down on the counter. My movements suddenly slow and deliberate. I knew with a certainty that settled in my bones that they were not talking about their own house. David sighed. It's Mom's house, Sarah. We can just use her home. It's an investment sitting idle, she countered, her voice dropping to a low, possessive pitch. 4 bedrooms for one woman who barely uses the upstairs. The market is peaking. The estate agent is spoke to say we could clear 450 easy. After fees, that's more than enough. We pay off the credit cards, fund the studio and that's the Lucia chip is booked and paid for. We've earned it. My breath got in my throat. An estate agent. She had already spoken to an estate agent. This wasn't a fantasy, it was a plan in motion. I stood frozen. Big knuckles wet where I gripped the edge of the granite worktop. And what about Mom? David asked. His voice was weaker now. The protest of a man who already surrendered. Where does she go? Sarah's reply was immediate, practical, and utterly devastating. There's that lovely new assisted living place, Oak Meadows by the river. It's perfect. They have organized activities, a nurse on call. It would be for the best, honestly. She's getting on. Less for her to worry about. We're framed as looking out for her. She gets a bit muddled sometime anyway. Mullet. The word struck me like a physical blow. The times it misplaced my glasses, the name I'd momentarily forgotten. They weren't moments of normal aging to them. They were evidence. They were bullying a case against my competence, against my right to my own life in my own home. They spoke of my future as piece furniture to be conveniently relocated. They were liquidating my life to pay for a holiday. The house Robert and I had built, the garden I had tended for 40 years, the room that held every memory cherished. It was just an asset, an obstacle between them and a beach in the Caribbean. In that moment, 30 years of quiet endurance fractured. The carefully constructed dam of maternal love, of forgiveness and forbearance, did not just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. The slow rip of resentment it felt for years became a flash flood of cold, clear rage. I was not a mother in their eyes. I was an inheritance, and they had simply grown tired of waiting for me to say. I backed away from the kitchen door, silent as a ghost. I collected my handbag from the hall, walked out the front door, and left the dinner half prepared on the counter. As I drove home, the world looked different, sharper. The fog of obligation had lifted, and for the first time, I saw the path ahead with perfect chilling clarity. They had made a business decision. Well, so were I. That conversation in the utility room wasn't an anomaly, it was as Rosetta Stone. Suddenly, hundreds of small, confusing interaction from the past few years clicked into place, forming a coherent and terrifying picture. The whispers weren't take their home, they had been in my own kitchen for months, so subtly that I had mistaken them for the sound of love and concern. I remembered a Sunday right just after Christmas. I bought myself a new coat in the winter cellars, a smart watching coat in a deep navy blue. It was the first time in years I had spent a significant amount of money on myself, and I felt as small. The faint flicker of joy wearing it, David noticed it as soon as he walked in. He didn't say, "That's a lovely coat, Mom." He said, "Wow, Mom, things must be going well." His tone was light, but the implication was clear. My small luxury was an extravagance that perhaps the family, as a whole, could not afford. It felt a prickle of guilt and quickly changed the subject, the joy of my purchase evaporating under his casual scrutiny. Sarah's methods were more insidious. She had perfected the art of the public expression of concern. We'd be at a family gathering, and I might pause there for a moment to find a word. "Oh, Mom," she would say, her voice dripping with affection as she patted my hand. "Take your time. It's on the tip of your tongue, isn't it?" She would turn to her cousin or a neighbor, smiling a sad, knowing smile. Her memory not quite what it used to be, bless her. We have to keep a close eye. And I, wanting to be agreeable, wanting to avoid a scene, would simply stammer and let the moment pass. Each time I was a willing participant in the construction of my own incompetence. She wasn't just commenting on me, and she was sitting down a more wider circle, laying the groundwork for the day they would need witnesses to agree that Eleanor Vance was, sadly, a bit muddled. Her whisper of "Are you sure you turned the oven off, Eleanor?" was never a question, it was an accusation wrapped in the tissue paper of care. Their greatest weapon, however, was the united front. They were a perfectly rehearsed zoo. David would present the problem a looming bill, a once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity. Head by the worried son, burdened by the world. Then Sarah would step in with the solution, always presented a way to help them. If you could just help with the school fees this term, Eleanor, it would take so much pressure off David. You know how his health suffers when he's stressed. My money wasn't there for the lifestyle, it was for my son's well-being. My savings were transformed into a preventive medicine only I could administer. The refuse was not to be prudent, it was to be uncaring. It was to willingly let my son suffer. With the clarity of hindsight, I saw the emotional architecture they had built around me. It was a prison disguised as a sanctuary where the bars were far from guilt, obligation, and a carefully cultivated sense of my own declining faculties. They had conditioned me to see my own needs as selfish and their wants as essential. The day I overheard them, they hadn't suddenly become predators. They had merely been discussing the final phase of one that had been underway for years. My realization was not that they had a plan, but that I had been a part of it unknowingly all along. And I remember something else, a small detail I dismissed. A few weeks ago, a letter had arrived from Mike about updating power of attorney forms. As he put it aside, thinking it was just a standard mail out, now I felt a chill. They hadn't just been talking, they had been preparing the paperwork. For 2 days after the incident at David's house, I assisted in a state of suspended animation. The raging had carried me home cooled into a heavy, suffocating ash of despair. Knowledge was one thing, action was another entirely. I was one woman, in her 70s, against her own family. The very thought of confrontation made me bon ache. They had spent years weaving a net of obligation and doubt around me, and now that I could see it, I felt utterly tangled within it. It was the memory, the bank letter, the one about the power of attorney, that finally spurred me into motion. On Friday morning, I found it in the drawer where I kept my bills, a blank, corporate envelope that now felt like a threat. I didn't drive into the city to a gleaming law office. My shame was too great for that. Instead, I went to the community center downtown, a place of bay corridors and flickering fluorescent light that smelled faintly of disinfectant and boiled vegetables. A flyer I picked up at the library months ago had advertised a free legal aid clinic for seniors. At the time, I thought it was for other people, the unfortunate, the ones without family to look after them. The waiting room was filled with them. People with worried eyes and worn-out coats, clutching folders of papers to their chests. I took a number and sat on a hard plastic chair, feeling like an imposter. I was Eleanor Vance, retired head librarian, a woman who had always paid her bill time and kept her affairs in meticulous order. The bay hair felt like a profound failure, a public admission that I had lost control of my own life. When my number was called, a young woman with pony dark hair and a Kimber's serious face met me at the door. "Miss Vance, Maria Flores, please come in." Her office was small windowless cubicle, stocked with legal binders. She wore a simple blouse, dark trousers, and a pair of sturdy, flat-soled shorts. For some reason, that detail calmed me. She was there to impress anyone. She was here to work. She gestured for me to sit and exit, putting my hand back on my lap like a shield. I started to speak, and the story had rehearsed in my mind dissolved into a hesitant, rambling account. I spoke of land promises, of my grandchildren, of feeling a bit muddled. I was downplaying it, I realized it, still trying to protect them, still trying to frame it as a misunderstanding. Marie listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes. She simply listened, her gaze steady, her pen moving across the yellow legal pad. When I finally trotted off, The silence in the small room was absolute. I felt my face flush, expecting her to tell me this was a family matter that I should talk to my son. Instead, she put her pen down with quiet, click. Miss Evans, she began, her voice even and clear. Thank you for telling me that. I want to reframe a few things for you. The money you've given your son over the years, with promises of repayment, thus aren't gifts. Legally, they can be considered undocumented loans. She paused, letting the words sink in. Sarah's comments about your memory, actually in front of other people. That's a common tactic to undermine a person's self-reliability and factors. It's a form of gaslighting. And they plan to sell your home, move you into care without your consent. That has a name. It is a textbook conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation. The words gaslighting, exploitation, conspiracy struck me with the force of a physical impact. They were cold, hard, legal terms. They stripped away all the messy emotions of love and duty and betrayal and try only to clean sharp lies of the truth. I wasn't an ungrateful mother or a confused old woman. I was the target of a long and calculated campaign. For the first time, I felt the shame begin to recede, replaced by a slow burning ember of indignation. They were preparing the paperwork already, I whispered, remembering the letter. Power of attorney. Maria nodded, unsurprised. That's the next logical step for them gaining control. But we are going to get there first. She pulled the legal part towards her and turned it to face me. Here is what we're going to do. First, you will go home and you will document everything, every loan, every sacrifice. Put a price on it, make it a bill. We need to turn your heart into hard data. She pointed to the second note on her pad. Second, we are going to protect your assets. Immediately, you hurry. And this portfolio your man's been left ill. We will place them into an irrevocable trust. It will be a fortress. Your son will not be able to touch it, sell it, or use it as collateral. You will be the sole beneficiary for your lifetime. Her fierce intelligence was a light in a very dark room. She wasn't just offering sympathy, she was handing me a sword and a shield. She saw me not as a pitiable old woman, but as a client who required a strategy. When I left the community center an hour later, the gray afternoon seemed brighter. The weight in my chest hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer the dead weight of despair. It was the solid, heavy feeling of purpose. I had a plan. I had an ally, and she was very sensible to turn hurt into hard data, Maria had said. The instruction became my mantra. For the next 3 weeks, my dining room tile, a place on Earth for family meals and holiday feasts, became an archaeological dig site into my own life. I retrieved decades of dusty archie boxes from the attic, filled with bank statements, tax returns, and cheeky book stops. I unearthed old series. The pages filled with minute, librarian script detailing the quiet dramas of a life I thought ordinary. The work was methodical and excruciating. It considered check factor that it felt like a small paper cut on my soul. Each diary entry was a cost. Difficult today. The business is struggling again. Robert and I decided to help with the rent this month. He sounded so stressed. Another entry. Here after Sarah's mother can watch the children, so I've rearranged my shifts at the library for the next 2 weeks. It means I'll miss the regional librarians conference in Harrogate, but the little ones need Nana. I had never thought of these moments as sacrifices. They were just what a mother, what grandmother did. But now, under the cold, fluorescent light in reality, I saw them for what they were: transactions. My time, my money, my opportunities, awkwardly transferred from my account to his. Following Maria's advice, I bought a simple laptop and taught myself how to use a spreadsheet program. The learning process was slow, frustrating, but empowering. Each successful formula was a small victory. The first column was date, the second term description, the third, financial value, the fourth, opportunity cost. That last column was the most painful to feel. How do you quantify a missed promotion? I resigned the salary bands at the library, calculating the difference between my final pay grade and the one I have achieved. Had I been able to accept the regional supervisor role I was offered. The one I turned down because David's first marriage was collapsing and he needed me to be a stable presence for him. The number was sickening. The childcare was simpler to calculate, yet more damning. I called a local nursery and asked for their holy rates gone back several years. I log every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon is spent with Leo and Maya so Sarah could build her business. The house ran into the thousands. The total monetary value was more than the down payment each given them for their house. I had not been helping, I had been providing a free, long-term, professional service. One afternoon, sorting through a box of old receipts, I found a quite a travel agent dated 12 years ago. A 2-week tour of Italy's odd cities for a single traveler. It had been my dream after Robert died. A way to reclaim a part of myself that wasn't there, just mom or widow. I had the money saved in my personal account. A week before, it was due to pay the deposit. David had called. His car had failed its mod, a catastrophic repair bill. He couldn't get to work, had said, his voice thick with panic. He transferred the entire contents of my Italy fund to him that same day. He promised it, as always, to pay me back. He never did. I entered the cost of the chip into the spreadsheet, and under opportunity cost, it simply typed at Florence. As the spreadsheet grew line by agonizing line, something shifted within me. The vague, formless cloud of resentment that had hung over me for years began to dissipate, replaced by the hard, crystalline certainty of numbers on a screen. My hurt was no longer just a feeling, it was a figure at the bottom of column, a figure that grew with every entry. This was not the petty accounting of a bitter old woman. This was the forensic audit of a life's resources. By the time it was finished, the document perished long. It was a precise, dispassionate, and irrefutable record of my generosity and the achievement. It was the cost of motherhood that had been allowed to become a one-sided financial arrangement. This was not a letter. It was not plea, it was an invoice, and every single line item was true. The silence lasted for 27 hours. Because I counted. 27 hours after the registered letter was signed for, the phone finally rang. It was a Thursday, just past noon. I was pruning the roses in the back garden, my hands protected by thick leather gloves. I let it ring 3 times before I went inside to answer. My heart as steady, rhythmic drum against my rib. Mom, David was ties straightened over a wire of disbelief. David, I reply, my tone level. I sat down in the chair by the phone, a small, calculated act of settling in for a long conversation. There was a pause, and then a short, incredulous laugh. Okay, very funny. You had out for a minute there. Seriously, what is? Some kind of joke, eh? Babe, there is no joy. David, he said calmly. It is an itemized list of outstanding debts. Debts? He practically spat the word. Mom, are you feeling alright? This the debt is his family. It's what families are. This spreadsheet thing is insane. You come up with this yourself. Opportunity cost for a librarian's conference in Inginjimepa. For God's sake. His ridicule was a blunt instrument, designed to make me feel foolish, to make me doubt my own mind. It was the same tactic, just amplified. Instead of feeling foolish, however, I felt a cold surge of clarity. He was even gentle Danny the transactions. He was denying my right to have ever counted me. Every item on that list is accurate, I stated, my voice devoid of the emotion I lately changed to provoke. Suddenly, another voice joined the call, smooth and sweet as honey. Eleanor, it's Sarah. Darling, we're not angry. We're just worried. This is so out of character for you. I heard a faint click as she picked up an extension. They were together. A united front. Is everything okay? She continued, her voice oozing a practiced, glowing sympathy. Are you eating properly? You know, since your father passed, you've been so isolated in that big house. Maybe you're feeling a bit lonely. Conflict happens, you know. There it was again. Confucius, the cornerstone of their entire strategy. I was not a rational actor, good legitimate Raven says. It was a lonely old woman losing her grip, concocting fantasy out of boredom and senility. They were trying to gaslight me in real time. I am perfectly fine, I said, my voice dropped in an octave, the warmth gone completely. My memory and my faculties are entirely intact, which is how I was able to compile such a detailed and accurate document. Accurate? David jumped back in, his voice rising in pitch. You're billing me for my first car, the car you bought me for my 17th birthday. He paid the deposit. You were to pay the loan. You missed every single payment, and the financing company came to me. I paid it off in full to protect your future credit. You will find the documentation from the lender included in the appendix. The mention of an appendix of documentation seemed to throw him. There was a moment of stunned silence on his end. He had likely assumed my numbers were pulled from thin air, from a failing memory. The idea that I had proof that I had kept records clearly hadn't occurred to him. Sarah, ever the strategist, recovered first. Eleanor, this isn't healthy. Tallying up old grievances. It's not about money or family. Why don't you let David and me come over? We can have a nice cup of tea, and you can tear up this silly piece of paper, and we can all forget about it. Forget about it, erase it. Returns total the comfortable statue was the silent benefactor and they were the deserving recipients. Her offer wasn't an alive brand, it was an attempt to regain control, to bring me back into where the subtle manipulations work best. No, he said. The word was small, but it filled the space between us with the density of lead. They will be naughty. The document stands. It is a formal notification among his await. The lie went quiet for a moment. The disbelief and ridicule were gone, replaced by something colder, annoyance. The irritation of a parent who is refusing to behave. Right, David said finally, his voice fat. I see. We'll talk when you've come to your senses. And he hung up. I played the receiver back in its cradle with a steady hand. My heart was still beating its slow, even rhythm. The conversation had been everything I expected and everything I needed. They hadn't shown remorse or conflict or even a flicker of understanding. They had shown contempt. They did not see a dead to be repaid. They saw a mother who had stepped out of line, and their dismissal, more than any argument could, sealed my resolve. This was no longer about getting the money back. It was about taking my life back. The first volley in the new campaign arrived not from them, but with my younger sister, Carol. She called on Saturday morning. Her voice a frantic was of static and concern. Eleanor, I just got off the phone with David. Eleanor, what is going on? He's worried sick about you. I was in the middle of on the mantelpiece. The familiar photo of David and his first car staring back at me. I set the duster down. And what exactly did David say was going on? He said you're not well, Carol stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush, that you sent him some sort of demand for money. That you're confused, missing up past and present. He thinks you're terribly lonely in that big house and you're lashing out. The words were almost a verbatim transcript of Sarah's performance on the phone. It was chillingly efficient. They weren't just jeffing themselves, they were launching a preemptive strike, poisoning the well before could even approach it. Carol thought my voice said dangerously calm. Did David happen to mention that he and his wife were planning house and then put men in a home to food, a Caribbean cruise? A shocked silence met my question. What no, Eleanor, that's a dreadful thing to say. He would never go there. This is just what he meant. You're getting paranoid. The conversation ended soon after. Carol promised to call again, to check in, her tone nautic with pity one reserves for the afflicted. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. It wasn't with rage this time, but with a caught understanding. This was the strategy to frame me as delusional, to make any truth is spoken some literature of a bitter, confused old woman isolate, discredit. The next call came that afternoon. It was my nephew, Mark, David's cousin. His approach was different, man to man, full of fast-born homie. On the L, their deathbed may have been a bit of a misunderstanding, something about money. You've no heads or anything for you. Maybe you should just let it go. And no sense in tearing the family apart over a few quid from years ago. A few quid? They were minimizing the sum, trivializing the 30-year sacrifice into pocket money. By the end of the weekend, I had spoken to 4 different relatives. Each one fed a carefully tailored version of the story. To the sentimental ones, I was lonely and grieving. To the dramatic ones, I was being petty and vindictive. To all of them, David and Sarah were the dutiful, worried children, struggling to manage an increasingly difficult parent. The final, most vicious blow was delivered on Tuesday. I was supposed to have Leo and Maya for the afternoon. It was our weekly tradition. We were going to make lemon drizzle cake, their favorite. I had the ingredients laid out on the counter when my mobile rang. It was David. Hey mom, he said, his voice artificially bright. Listen, something's come up. We can make it this afternoon. Oh, he said looking at the box of flour and sugar. Eat everything outright. Are the children ill? No, everyone's fine. It's just well. Sarah, I think it might be best if we give it a miss for a while. You know, until things are a bit calmer. The meaning was unmistakable. The unspoken words hung in the air between us. You are not stale. You are not safe. He was using me grandchildren. Me the best joy. As a bargaining chip, he was severing the connection. Punishing me for my defense by withholding people he loved most in the world. You see, he said. There was nothing else to say. The cruelty of it took my breath away. It was a masterstroke of emotional blackmail. It's for the best, Mom, he said, the false sincerity making me skin crawl. For everyone, we just need some space. After he hung up, he stood in my silent kitchen and looked at the ingredients for a cake that would not be made. That was the moment the hurt truly landed. The financial exploitation felt cold, distant, a matter of numbers. This felt like a blade twisting in me hurt for a long, painful horror. I allowed myself to feel the full weight of their cruelty. I let the grief wash over me, and then he stood up, went out the sink, and washed my hands. I called Maria. When she entered, I didn't cry. My voice was steady, clear and cold as ice. Maria is Eleanor Vance. They've started the next phase, the character assassination, and they're using my grandchildren as leverage. There was a brief pause on her end. I expect this, Eleanor, she said, her tone pragmatic and reassuring. Isolation is a classic tactic. It's meant to break you down, make you feel alone and powerless. Are you alright? I will be, I said, looking out the window at the roses he had pruned just days before. They made a mistake. They think this will make me surrender. They have no idea what it's like to have nothing left to lose. Either emotional warfare was designed to shatter my nerve, to drive me back into the familiar corral of guilt and complaints. It did the opposite. Every manipulative phone call, every piece of weaponized PSP from a relative, every imagined lonely afternoon without my grandchildren simply hardened my resolve into something sharp and diamond bright. They thought they were seeing a frail old woman. They had no idea they were forging a weapon. A week after the campaign began, I was not at home waiting for the phone to ring. I was in a quiet, book-lined office downtown, sitting opposite a solitary nightmare Alistair Finch. He was a man in his 60s with keen eyes, a teddy gray beard, and an air of unflappable calm. Maria sat beside me, her legal pad open, her presence a silent, reassuring anchor. Moving revealed that was Maria and had prepared the deed to my house, the statements from my main current account, and, finally, they took further the investment portfolio Robert had left me. The one David and Sarah knew nothing about. Mifik looked it up from the final page, his expression thoughtful. Your husband was a very prudent man, Mrs. Vance, he said quietly. He was, I replied. He believed in building strong foundations. And that is precisely what we had to offer you today, he said, sliding a thick document across the polished mahogany desk. This is the deed of trust. I have drafted it exactly to your UNMAS Flora specifications. It is an irrevocable living trust. He explained the terms in simple language, stripping away the dense legal jargon. Irrevocable. The word resonated with a profound finality. Once named, it could not be undone. Not by me, not by David, not by anyone. The assets it placed within it would no longer belong to Eleanor Vance, the individual. They would belong to the Vance family trust. You, Mr. Vance, he continued, tapping a clause with his pen, and named as the sole life my beneficiary. The trust is designed for one purpose, and not only during your lifetime to provide for your care, your comfort, and your security. You can live in your house for the rest of your days. You can draw an income from the investments. Nothing changes for you, except that you are protected. He paused. This also renders any attaining power of attorney over your financial affairs entirely moot. The assets are no longer legally yours to be managed by another person. They are the property of the trust, governed only by the rulers we are setting out today. It was the perfect defense. They had been trying to get the keys to the castle, not realizing I was having the entire fortress legally dismantled and reassembled on impenetrable ground. Then he came to the final section, the part that what would happen after I was gone. Regarding the beneficiaries upon your death, he said, his gaze meeting mine, your grandchildren, Leo and Maya, are named as the primary recipients of the trust assets to be managed by a professional trustee until they come of age. He cleared his throat. David Van is named as a contingent beneficiary. Contingent, a beautiful, precise legal word. His inheritance misery from the document is contingent upon the full and complete repayment of that itemized die invoices dated May 11 of this year, a copy of which will be permanently appended to his deed. Shown the debt remain unpaid at time of your passing. His portion of the inheritance he forfeited and absorbed into the grandchildren's share. There it was. It wasn't disinheritance. It was accountability. It was not cutting him off out of spite. I was simply enforcing the terms of the agreements he himself had made over 3 decades. The path to his inheritance was still there, clear and well lit. The price of admission was simply the money he already owed. Murphy slid the document and a heavy black fountain pen towards me. If you are ready, Miss Vance. I picked up the pen and felt cold and solid in my hand. In my mind's eye, I saw them all David's dismissive laugh, Sarah's syrupy concern, Carol's worried pity. I saw the ingredients for a lemon drizzle exceeding unused on my counter. These signatures were not just illegal, they were an answer to it all. It was the quickest, most powerful scream of my life. My name, Eleanor Vance, flowered from the onto paper and gained. I seen it away my house. I seen it away Robert's life savings. I seen it away everything he had, placing it up behind an ironclad wall of legal protection. When I set the pen down, a profound peace settled over me. It was the feeling of a czar, a very heavy czar, locking firmly into place. The whispers and the threats could continue outside, but they could no longer get in. I had built my fortress, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt safe. I let a week of silence pass after the trust was signed. I wanted them marinating in their own self-righteousness, confident that their campaign of isolation has succeeded. Then I sent David a simple text message. I would like to have a family meeting to resolve this matter. My representative has booked a room for us next Tuesday at 10 a.m. The address is attached. Please confirm you and Sarah will attend. The formality of the message, the mention of a representative, was designed to intrigue and unsettle him. He confirmed it within the hour. The address was not a solicitor's office or a community center. It was a discreet suite of room in a modern glass building overlooking the river, the kind of place you set for high-level corporate negotiations. Maria had recommended mediate a retired family court named Judge Davis, a woman renowned for her no-nonsense approach and her ability to cut to emotional plotter the heart of a dispute. I arrived early with Maria. Judge Davis, a formidable woman with sharp gray eyes and an air of imitations, greeted us. She looked at me not as a victim, but as a principal in a negotiation. We sat at one side of a long, plushed boardroom table. In front of me, Maria placed 3 neat stacks of documents, the original invoice with detailed appendices, a copy of the fully executed deed of trust, and a summary of my net worth, including the fortress of Robert's hidden portfolio. Hey, Davy and Sarah arrived exactly at 10. They walked in with an air of strained confidence, like parents arriving for a difficult meeting with a headmaster. They clearly expected a cozy chat, perhaps with a well-meaning therapist or a vicar. Someone they could charm with the narrative of a confused, grieving mother. Their faces registered the first flicker of confusion when they saw the room. The corporate setting, the intimidatingly long table. Sarah recovered first, her smile snapping into place. Eleanor, we were so glad you reached out. This is a much better way to handle things. She glanced at Maria, her smile faltering slightly. Judge Davis did not stand. She simply gestured to the 2 empty chairs opposite us. May and Mrs. Van, please take a seat. I am Judge Davis. I have been asked to mediate this meeting. The word gesture landed in the room with a tone. Davis' confident posture deflated by an inch. They sat, looking unsteadily from me to Maria to impassive face of the mediator. My mother needs a mediator, David began, acting at a wounded disbelief. What is this? A divorce? This, Davis said, her voice calm and authoritative, is a meeting to clarify a significant and long-standing financial arrangement between yourself and Miss Vance. She slid a copy of the invoice across the table towards him. You have both seen this document. Missy has extensive corroborating evidence for every line item. Should you wish to dispute any of them, David waved a dismissive hand. This ridiculous is a fantasy. We're her family. Indeed, the judge replied smoothly, which brings us to the second document. She slid a copy of the deed of trust across the table. As of last week, all of your mother's significant assets, including her home and investment portfolios, were placed into an irrevocable trust. I believe you'll find the terms most illuminating. I watched their faces as they read. I saw the exact moment the blood drained from Sarah's. Her eyes, sharp and quick, scanned the clauses, her lips moving silently. David was slower, his brow furrowed in concern, until he reached the section on contingent beneficiaries. His head snapped up, his eyes locking on mine. The mask of the concerned son was gone. In its place was raw, unfiltered fury. "You did what?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You put my inherited children's inheritance in a trust. Your mother has secured her future," Judge Davis stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And she has secured her grandchildren's future. Your own inheritance is now entirely dependent on your actions." Sarah finally spoke, her voice thin and brittle. This is caution." On the contrary, Maria interjected, speaking for the first time, "it is consequence. We also have a copy of a letter from your mother's bank regarding power of attorney forms, which we understand were requested shortly before your mother overdrew plans to liquidate her assets." That was the final blow. The mention of a power of attorney request, they proved they had already begun the legal process of taking control, eviscerated their position. Their faces were a mask of shock and exposure. The narrative they had so carefully constructed of the loving children and the conflict mother had just been dismantled piece by piece under the sterile lights of a ballroom. They looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in years. They did not see a mordant, lonely old woman they could manipulate. They saw a stranger, a strategist who had outmaneuvered them at every turn, using the very tools of finance and law they had assumed were beyond my grasp. Their confidence didn't just evaporate, it shattered. The room was silent, save for the sound of their quiet, panicked breathing. The silence in the room stretched thin, brittle as glass. David was the first to break it, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. It was frayed, defensive. He fell back on the only argument had left his own wounded feelings. "I can't believe you would do this," he said, shaking his head and looking directly at me, his eye pleading for a return to the old dynamic. "After everything, to go behind my back, to cheat me like a stranger, I'm your son." Judge Davis did give me a chance to respond. Her gaze remained fixed on David. "Mr. Vance, your mother's actions were in direct response to a conversation she overheard regarding the sale of her home. Is her account of that conversation accurate?" David Flynn cornered. It was just talk. Brainstorming. We were stressed. It didn't mean anything. "You have spoken to an estate agent, Sarah," Maria added, her tone quiet but sharp as a needle. Sarah, who had been staring at the trust document, itching to incinerate it with her gaze, looked us up. "We were just exploring options," she snapped, her composure cracking. "People saw that. It's what you saw when you're trying to build a future funded by liquidating your mother-in-law's primary asset and moving her into managed care." The judge asked, her voice dangerously mild. Was she a party to these brainstorming sessions? And the carefully constructed wall of the united front began to crumble under this calm, relentless questioning. David's blustering anger gave way to a sullen, childish resentment. Sarah's sophisticated veneer peeled back to reveal a raw, desperate panic. "This is your fault," she suddenly hissed, turning on David. Her voice was a low, venomous whisper that carried across the table. "I told you this was a bad idea. Told you your sales numbers weren't enough. You and your ridiculous pride." "My pride?" David shot back, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. "You're the one who had to have the kitchen extension. You're the one who insisted on the private stores. The bloody organic food delivery service were drowning, and you're worried about keeping up with the neighbors." It was happening, the unraveling. All the private resentments, the financial anxieties they had hidden from the world and from me, were now spilling out onto the polished bottom table. The conflict was no longer about me supposed senility. It was about their reality, the crushing weight of their debts, the hollowness of their carefully curated lifestyle. Sarah let out a harsh, broken laugh. Of course, I was worried. We're 60,000 in one credit card debt, David. The second mortgage messed out. Evans innovative disaster from 20 years ago is still a black mark on our credit. What was supposed those are? She finally turned her well, panicked eyes to me. We didn't have a choice here. Your house, it was the only way out. It was the only asset enough to fix everything. There it were, the raw, unvarnished truth, not a malicious plot born of pure greed, but a desperate, panicked plan born of financial ruin. They weren't just vultures circling, they were drowning swimmers clawing at the only available life raft. The admission hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. It was not an excuse, but it was, finally, an explanation. I looked at my son, not the successful manager he pretended to be, but a man utterly out of his depth, terrified of his own failure. And I looked at his wife, a woman so consumed by the fear of that she was so willing to put me overboard to stay afloat. The rage I had held on to for weeks began to subside, replaced by a profound and weary sadness. So you decided to have me declared incompetent, I said, my voice quiet. It was not a question. Sarah froze if I struck her. David just stared at the table, his shoulders slumped in defeat. They united from what's gone, replaced by two isolated people steeped in their own private misery. They had come into the room to manage me. They were leaving it having exposed themselves. The power dynamic, so skewed for so long, had finally, irrevocably shifted. In the aftermath of Sarah's confession, a heavy, exhausted silence descended on the boardroom. The fight had gone off them, replaced by the grey ash of exposure. Jude Davis looked at me, her expression unreadable, and simply raised an eyebrow. The floor was mine. He took a slow breath, gathering the words had practiced in my mind for weeks. I am not going to pursue this debt, I said, my voice clear and steady. Davis' head lifted, a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. The invoice has served its purpose. It has made the invisible visible. It has placed a value on what was always treated as valueless. I folded my hand on the table. From this day forward, our relationship will change. There will be no more blank checklists, no more last-minute rescues, no more leveraging of my love for your financial convenience. My finances are my own. They are for me security and my peace, and they are no longer about your financial planning. I looked from my son to his wife. If we are to have a relationship, it will be built on mutual respect, not on your need and my obligation. It will be a relationship of equals, and it will be on me terms. I paused, letting the weight of a new reality settle. As for my grandchildren, I loved them dearly. I will call you next week to arrange a time for me to see them. That part of our lives can, I hope, be repaired. But the rest will take time. Then I stood up. Maria stood with me. I did not wait for their response, for their apology, their arguments. The negotiation was over. I had stated my terms. I nodded on Sturgis Davis, a silent gesture of gratitude, and then Maria and I walked out the room, leaving David and Sarah alone at a long table with the ruins of their old life. The following weeks were quiet. My sister Carol colored, her tone now uncertain, having heard a fractured, panicked version of events from David. I did not engage it. I simply thought I was well and that the matter was resolved. David colored as arranged. His voice was subdued, hesitant. He sounded younger. We made a plan for me to see the children the following Saturday. When I arrived at their house, Sarah stayed in her studio. David brought the children out to me, and we spent the afternoon at the park. It was awkward, fragile, but it was a start. There was no mention of money. This afternoon, a month after that meeting, a courier delivered a thick envelope. Inside was a certified copy of the deed to my house, newly registered to the Vance family trust. I took the document with its stamps and seals out into the garden. The late summer sun was warm on my face. The roses it pruned in anger were now in full, glorious bloom. I sat on the bank trapper and I had built together, the stiff paper resting in my lap. I ran my fingers over the typed words. It was no longer just my name on the deed, but it was more mine than it had been for years. The trust was not a wall to keep my family out, it was a foundation to hold my own life up. The victory wasn't in the staggering sum on the invoice or in the shocked faces in that boardroom. It was here, in this quiet moment. It was in the absence of fear, the release from a 30-year-long obligation I had never consciously agreed to. The invoice had been a declaration of independence, just a constant for me new sovereign life. I looked up at the house, my hush, its bricks saturated with sunlight and memory. I was safe, I was sovereign, I was free, and in the profound peace of my own garden, I finally understood that this was what it felt like to own my own life again. Eleanor's journey reminds us that the quietest often carry the heaviest burdens. It shows that reclaiming your life isn't about winning a war, but about finding the courage to declare long overdue peace with yourself. True strength isn't just in giving, but in knowing when and how to finally stop. Thank you for joining us for this powerful story here on Sylora Stories. We were left with so much to think about, especially Eleanor's final decision. After everything she went through, was Eleanor right to establish boundaries without the actual repayment of the money? Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you again soon. Next time, we'll hear from a man who discovered his wife's most cherished family. Helen was actually the key to a secret she kept for 20 years.